A royal guard found a black envelope under Princess Charlotte's pillow, the chilling message found. The night had settled gently over the royal residence, wrapping the old stone walls in silence. Soft lights glowed along long hallways, reflecting off polished floors that had seen centuries of footsteps. For most people inside the palace, the day was over. Servants had finished their duties, officials had retired to their quarters, and the royal family had moved into their private rooms. Everything appeared calm, ordered, and safe, just as it always was. For the royal guard on duty that night, calm was not something to enjoy. It was something to observe closely. His name was not important. In the palace, guards were trained to be unseen, to blend into the background like shadows that never slept. He had served for many years, long enough to know that danger rarely announced itself loudly. It came quietly, hidden inside small details most people ignored. His shift began like countless others. He checked in, reviewed the duty log, and followed the familiar route through the private wing. Every step followed strict rules. Every door, camera, and corner had been memorized over time. Nothing felt new, and that was exactly how it was supposed to be. Princess Charlotte was not in her room that night. She had been moved earlier to stay closer to family members, a decision made for comfort rather than security. Even so, her room remained under constant watch. Royal protocol did not change simply because a room was temporarily empty. The guard approached the door, scanned the security seal, and entered quietly. The room was neat, untouched, and softly lit. Curtains were drawn halfway, allowing moonlight to fall gently across the floor. The air smelled clean, with a faint trace of flowers placed earlier in the day. He paused, letting his eyes adjust. Guards were trained to look, not just see. He scanned the corners, the windows, the doors. Everything appeared exactly as it should. No signs of entry, no movement. No sound except the quiet hum of the building itself. Then his attention went to the bed. At first, nothing seemed wrong. The blanket was smooth, the sheets perfectly arranged, but something about the pillow felt different. It was not obvious. It was not dramatic. It was the kind of detail only someone who had seen the same room hundreds of times would notice. The pillow sat slightly lower than usual. The guard stepped closer. His training told him not to assume, not to jump to conclusions. Still, instinct made his chest tighten. The pillowcase was clean, pressed, and in place, but there was a faint line along the fabric, as if something thin had been beneath it. His hand hovered in the air for a moment. Touching personal belongings of the royal family was never done lightly. But security always came first. He moved carefully, slowly lifting the pillow just enough to check beneath it. That was when he saw it. A black envelope lay flat on the mattress. It was simple. No decoration, no name, no seal, just a clean, dark envelope placed with care. It had not slipped there by accident. It had not been forgotten or misplaced. It had been put there on purpose. The guard froze. Time seemed to stretch as his mind began working through possibilities. Access to this room was limited. Every person who entered was logged. Cameras covered the hallways. There were no signs of forced entry, no alarms triggered. Yet the envelope was real. It rested quietly where no one should have been able to place it. He did not touch it again. Following protocol, he stepped back, secured the room, and used his communication device to report the discovery. His voice remained calm, measured, professional, but inside his thoughts moved quickly. This was not a normal situation. This was not a mistake. Within minutes, the atmosphere in the palace shifted quietly, invisibly. No alarms rang. No guards ran through hallways. Instead, security tightened in subtle ways. Additional personnel were redirected. Doors were checked. Screens were watched more closely. The senior officers arrived soon after. They listened carefully as the guard explained exactly what he had seen, down to the smallest detail. He answered every question without hesitation. His experience showed in the way he spoke, Not dramatic, not fearful, just precise. The envelope was photographed where it lay. The bed, the pillow, the surrounding area, all documented. Only then was the envelope carefully lifted using protective gloves. Everyone in the room understood the seriousness of what had happened. This was not about a piece of paper. It was about access. Someone had entered a space that was meant to be protected at all costs. Someone had crossed a line without being seen. As procedures unfolded, the guard stood nearby, watching silently. He had done his duty, yet a weight settled in his chest. He knew this moment would not simply pass. Even if nothing more happened, the meaning of this discovery would stay. Security was not about reacting to chaos. It was about preventing it before it began. As the room was sealed and officials prepared to move the envelope to a secure location, the guard took one last look at the bed. It looked harmless again, peaceful even. But now he knew how fragile that peace truly was. The palace returned to silence, but it was no longer the same silence as before. Somewhere within its walls, a question had been planted, quiet, deliberate, and deeply unsettling. The black envelope was no longer just an object. From the moment it was removed from under the pillow, it became a serious concern that touched every corner of the palace. Even though nothing loud or visible happened, everyone involved could feel the change. The air felt heavier, and every step taken by the security team carried extra meaning. The envelope was placed inside a clear protective cover and carried carefully through quiet hallways. No servants were present. No members of the royal family were nearby. Everything was handled silently, exactly as protocol demanded. The goal was clear: protect the truth, protect the people, and prevent fear from spreading. The guard who found the envelope walked a few steps behind the senior officers. His face remained calm, but his thoughts were restless. He replayed the moment again and again in his mind. Had he missed something earlier? Had there been a sound, a shadow, a small movement he ignored? Years of training had taught him discipline, yet now he questioned every memory of the evening. They entered a secure room deep inside the palace. It was a place few people ever saw. Thick doors, controlled access, and cameras watching every angle. This room was used only for matters that could affect the safety of the royal family. The envelope was placed on a plain table under bright light. It looked even simpler now. No marks, no fingerprints visible to the eye, just smooth black paper folded neatly. The choice of color felt intentional. Black was serious. Black demanded attention without shouting. Before anything else happened, more people were called in. Security experts, senior officials, a handwriting specialist. Every person followed strict rules. Phones were not allowed. Notes were taken by hand. No one spoke louder than necessary. The guard was asked to explain everything again, from the moment he entered the room to the moment he called it in. He described the pillow, the crease, the position of the envelope. He even demonstrated how he lifted the pillow. His words were simple, clear, and steady. No one doubted his honesty. Once his statement was complete, he was asked to wait outside. This was not a punishment. It was procedure. Inside the room, the envelope was finally opened. The flap lifted slowly, carefully, as if the paper itself carried weight. Inside was a single sheet. No decoration, no symbol, just writing. The handwriting was neat and controlled, not rushed, not emotional. Every letter was shaped with care, as if the writer wanted the message to be read slowly. The message was short. It did not threaten harm. It did not ask for money. It did not demand anything at all. That was what made it disturbing. The message spoke about observation, about knowing routines, about understanding how safety worked inside the palace. It mentioned small details that were not public knowledge, things only someone with close access would notice. The words were polite, almost respectful, yet cold in their confidence. The message suggested that safety was being tested, not attacked. Silence filled the room once the message was read aloud. No one reacted immediately. Faces remained controlled, professional, but behind calm expressions, concern grew quickly. This was not a random act. This was not a prank. Someone had entered the private space of a child not to cause chaos, but to send a message of presence. The decision was made quickly. The royal family would be informed, but carefully. Panic was the enemy. Princess Charlotte would not be told everything, only what was necessary for her comfort. Her daily life would continue as normally as possible. At the same time, security levels were raised quietly. Extra guards were added to key locations. Patrol routes were adjusted. Access schedules were changed without explanation. Even long-trusted routines were questioned. Cameras were reviewed from the past several days. Every staff member who had access to the room was listed. Cleaning crews, maintenance workers, security shifts. Each name represented a possibility, even if no one wanted to believe it. The guard who found the envelope was called back in later that night. He was informed that he had done exactly what he was supposed to do. His attention to detail had prevented a serious situation from becoming something worse. Still, he could sense the unspoken truth. This was only the beginning. As hours passed, investigators noticed something troubling. The cameras showed nothing unusual. No gaps. No blurred movement. No unfamiliar faces. Whoever placed the envelope had either avoided the cameras perfectly or understood their blind spots. Both options were equally unsettling. Staff interviews began quietly the next day. Questions were polite, calm, and respectful. No accusations, just routine checks, officials said, but everyone could feel the tension beneath the surface. People who had worked together for years suddenly wondered who truly knew what. The guard returned to duty the following night. The palace looked the same, sounded the same, but it felt different to him. Every shadow seemed sharper, every sound more noticeable. He walked the halls with renewed focus, understanding now that danger did not always come from outside walls. Sometimes it arrived gently, placed beneath a pillow, wrapped in silence. The envelope itself was stored securely, sealed and labeled. Experts would study the paper, the ink, the pressure of the pen. They hoped for clues, but deep down, many understood the truth. The message had already achieved its goal. It had reminded everyone that safety was not permanent. It had shown that trust, once shaken, was difficult to restore. As the night ended and morning light touched the palace walls, one thing was certain. The black envelope was gone, but its presence remained. And somewhere, the person who placed it knew that it had been found. The days following the discovery of the message passed quietly on the surface, but beneath that calm, the palace was fully awake. Nothing moved without notice. Nothing happened without being recorded. Every routine, no matter how old or trusted, was now questioned. Princess Charlotte continued her days as usual. She attended her lessons, spent time with family, and smiled for those around her. Special care was taken to keep her life feeling safe and normal. She was never told about the envelope. The adults around her agreed that fear had no place in her world. Behind the scenes, however, the work had only begun. The message was studied again and again. Experts examined the handwriting, the paper, and even the way the sheet was folded. The writing showed patience. The pen pressure was steady, not rushed or shaky. This suggested confidence. The words had been chosen carefully, without emotion. Whoever wrote the message wanted to be understood, not noticed. Security teams began mapping the palace in new ways. They walked routes not normally taken. They stood in corners and watched reflections in mirrors and glass. They tested how long it took to move from one area to another without being seen. What they found was uncomfortable. The palace was strong but not perfect. There were moments, brief ones, when routine created opportunity. A door left open for cleaning. A shift change that overlapped just enough. A camera angle that favored design over coverage. None of these flaws were obvious, but together they formed a pattern that someone patient could learn. That thought troubled everyone involved. Staff interviews continued. Every question was asked gently, without pressure. People answered openly. Many were confused, some offended, but most understood the seriousness of the situation. These were people who had dedicated their lives to service. The idea that one of them might be involved was difficult to accept. The guard who had found the envelope was questioned again, this time in more detail. Investigators asked about his past shifts, his routines, even his habits. He answered everything honestly. His record was clean. His service was respected. Still, they needed certainty. During one review session, a small detail emerged. The envelope had been placed during a time window when fewer people were nearby, but not none. A short period existed when one camera switched to backup mode during a system check. It lasted less than 2 minutes. 2 minutes was all someone needed. The question was not who could do it, but who would. Attention turned toward behavior rather than access. Investigators reviewed past incidents, complaints, and unusual patterns. Someone who watched more than worked. Someone who lingered. Someone who asked questions that seemed harmless at the time. Yet nothing stood out clearly. As days passed, tension grew. The absence of answers was worse than a clear threat. No demands followed. No second message appeared. Silence became its own message. Security around Princess Charlotte was increased further, but done so carefully. Extra guards were positioned in ways that felt natural. New routines were introduced quietly. Even her room was changed, though no one spoke about why. The palace leadership faced a difficult truth. The message was not meant to lead to action. It was meant to stay in the mind. To remind them that someone had reached a place that should have been unreachable. The guard returned to the princess's original room one afternoon, escorted by a supervisor. The bed had been changed. New pillows, new sheets. Everything looked perfect again. Yet he could not see it the same way. He stood silently, remembering the moment he lifted the pillow, remembering the calm certainty he felt that something was wrong. That feeling stayed with him. It had not faded. Outside the palace, life continued as usual. The public saw nothing different. News moved on. No reports were made. No statements were released. That was intentional. Attention would only invite more risk. Inside, lessons were learned quickly. Security teams updated protocols. Blind spots were eliminated. Logs were shortened and simplified to reduce confusion. Training sessions were held not as punishment but as reminders. Everyone was told the same thing: details matter. One evening, a senior official spoke quietly to the guard. "You did the right thing," he said. Many people would have missed it. The guard nodded, but he did not feel proud. He felt alert, because part of him believed the story was not finished. The message had not asked for anything. That meant the writer did not need a response. The act itself had been enough. That kind of confidence came from either certainty or control. Neither option brought comfort. Weeks passed without incident. The investigation slowed, not because it was complete, but because there was nowhere else to look. Every path had been followed, every name reviewed, every system tested. Nothing more appeared. Eventually, the palace returned to a sense of routine. Not the same as before, but close enough to feel stable. People relaxed slightly. Guards breathed easier. The urgency softened. Still, the envelope remained locked away. The guard continued his duties, now with a deeper understanding of his role. Protection was not about force. It was about awareness. It was about noticing the smallest change in a room meant to stay the same. Late one night, as he walked a familiar hallway, he paused and listened. The palace was quiet, just as it always was. But now, he knew that silence could mean many things. Somewhere beyond the walls, someone knew how close they had come. And somewhere within the palace, the lesson remained clear. Safety was not something you assumed. It was something you earned every single day. Time moved forward, but the memory of the black envelope did not fade. It stayed quietly in the minds of those who knew about it, like a shadow that appeared only when the light shifted just right. Even though no new message appeared, the palace did not forget. Instead, it adapted. Daily life continued with careful balance. Princess Charlotte laughed, learned, and played as children should. Her world was protected not only by walls and guards, but by decisions made silently behind closed doors. The goal was simple: keep her safe without letting fear touch her life. For the security teams, however, there was no return to comfort. Every day became an exercise in awareness. Guards were reminded that routine could be helpful, but also dangerous. Patterns were useful to those who studied them, so patterns were broken gently, without explanation. Shifts were adjusted, patrol paths changed. Even small habits like where a guard paused or how long a door stayed open were reconsidered. These changes were not announced. They were simply done. The guard who had found the envelope noticed these changes more than most. He understood why they mattered. He had learned that danger did not always rush in loudly. Sometimes it arrived quietly and left before anyone noticed. He began paying closer attention to people, not just places. How someone walked, where their eyes went, whether they seemed present or distracted. None of these things were proof of wrongdoing, but together they formed impressions. And impressions mattered. The investigation officially slowed, but it did not truly stop. It moved into a quieter phase. Instead of searching for answers, the focus shifted to prevention. The question was no longer who did this, but how do we make sure it never happens again? Meetings were held with fewer people present. Words were chosen carefully. Decisions were recorded and then locked away. Even within the palace, knowledge was limited. The fewer people who knew the details, the safer everyone would be. Experts from outside were quietly consulted, not announced, not named. They reviewed systems, layouts, and schedules. They offered suggestions that were firm but respectful. Some changes were accepted immediately. Others were debated carefully. One expert said something that stayed with the guard. "Perfect safety does not exist," the expert said calmly. "Only strong awareness." That idea shaped everything that followed. Princess Charlotte's room was no longer considered just a bedroom. It became a symbol, a reminder that protection was personal, that safety was not abstract. It was about real people, real moments, and real responsibility. The room was adjusted again, not dramatically, just enough. Furniture placement changed. Lighting was softened in some areas and strengthened in others. Every choice served a purpose. Still, no one spoke about the envelope openly. As weeks passed, the guard noticed something else. The palace felt more united. People spoke less but listened more. Trust was being rebuilt carefully, not assumed. There were moments of doubt, of course. Moments when a sound in the night caused a pause. Moments when a look lingered too long. But these moments passed, handled with calm and professionalism. One afternoon, the guard was asked to walk through the palace with a senior officer, not for inspection but for reflection. They moved slowly, stopping at certain points. "Here," the officer said quietly, "this used to be overlooked." The guard nodded. He could see it now, a small space between responsibility and habit. They continued walking. "This is where routine can help," the officer said later, "and this is where it can hurt." The guard understood. Balance was everything. Despite all the changes, there was still no sign of the person behind the message. No repeat action. No mistake. Whoever it was, they had disappeared completely. That absence was unsettling but also telling. The act had not been careless. It had been controlled. Some believed the message had been a test. Others believed it was a warning. No one could say for certain. What mattered was how the palace responded, and it had responded with quiet strength. One evening, the guard stood near a window overlooking the grounds. The sky was clear. Lights glowed softly in the distance. Everything looked peaceful. He thought about how close the palace had come to something worse, how one small detail had changed everything. how easily it could have been missed. He also thought about responsibility, about how protection was not just about authority but attention. That night he walked his route with steady steps. His eyes moved carefully, his mind focused. He did not feel fear. He felt purpose. The palace had learned something important. That security was not a wall you built once and forgot. It was a living effort, shaped by awareness and care. The black envelope remained sealed in storage. It had become less about its contents and more about what it represented. A moment when safety had been challenged and answered without noise. As time passed, the story of the envelope became something only a few people remembered clearly. It was not shared. It was not repeated, but its lesson stayed alive in action. And for the guard, every night brought the same quiet promise: to watch closely, to notice small things, to protect what mattered most, even when no one else was looking. The final chapter of the incident did not arrive with drama or noise. It came quietly, like the closing of a door that had been left slightly open for too long. Life inside the palace continued, steady and controlled, but it was no longer the same life as before. Something unseen had passed through, leaving behind awareness that could not be undone. Princess Charlotte grew a little older with each passing month. Her days were filled with learning, curiosity, and simple joys. She remained surrounded by warmth and care, protected from worries that did not belong to her. The adults around her made sure of that. To her, the palace was still just a place of safety, family, and routine. That was exactly how it should be. For the guard, however, the memory of the black envelope never fully disappeared. It did not trouble him in the way fear does. Instead, it sharpened him. It reminded him why his role mattered, even on nights when nothing happened and everything felt ordinary. Ordinary moments, he had learned, were when attention mattered most. Months passed without any further sign of intrusion. No messages, no unusual activity, no silent warnings hidden in quiet places. The palace systems held strong under their new structure. Guards worked with steady confidence. Staff adjusted to updated routines until they became natural. Slowly, trust returned, not blind trust but earned trust. The investigation was formally closed. Not because every answer had been found, but because every reasonable path had been followed. The conclusion was simple and careful. Someone had gained access once, left a message, and vanished without trace. Whether they intended more or had achieved exactly what they wanted was unknown. What mattered was that the palace had responded correctly. The envelope itself remained locked away, sealed and documented. It was rarely mentioned now. When it was, the tone was factual, never emotional. It had become part of internal history, not a story to be shared. One quiet evening, the guard was reassigned briefly to a different wing. As he walked unfamiliar corridors, he noticed how the lessons learned had shaped the entire building. Sightlines were clearer, corners were better observed. People moved with purpose, not habit. The palace felt awake, even in rest. Later that night, he returned to his usual route. He passed the area where Princess Charlotte's room had once been the center of concern. The door was closed. Everything was calm, exactly as it should be. He paused for a moment, listening. There was nothing unusual. Just the soft sounds of a living place at rest. In that silence, he understood something important. True safety was not loud. It did not announce itself. It existed quietly, built by people who paid attention when no one else did. His role had not changed in title, but it had deepened in meaning. He was not just guarding doors and halls. He was protecting moments, innocence, peace. That responsibility stayed with him. Over time, new guards joined. Others retired. Stories shifted and faded. But certain lessons were passed on during training, spoken calmly and without detail. Notice small things, instructors would say. Never assume a place is safe just because it always has been. No one mentioned envelopes. No one needed to. 1 year later, during a routine review, a senior officer addressed a small group of guards. He spoke about awareness, discipline, and quiet responsibility. Near the end, his eyes rested briefly on the guard who had found the envelope. "Sometimes," the officer said, "the most important action is noticing what doesn't belong." The guard nodded, understanding the weight behind the words. That night, as he completed his shift, he felt no tension, only readiness. The palace stood strong, not because it was perfect, but because it was alert. Whatever message had been sent in silence had been answered in the same way, with care, with attention, with strength that did not need to be seen. The black envelope remained a closed chapter, but its impact lived on in every careful step, every quiet check, every moment of awareness. It had tested the palace, and the palace had responded without panic. As dawn approached and soft light touched the stone walls, the guard ended his watch. Another day would begin soon, full of ordinary moments worth protecting. He walked away knowing one simple truth: safety is not the absence of threat, it is the presence of vigilance.